Welcome to the Go Further Faster half guard video. There's a sense in which this instructional video begins with a paradox. I often refer to this as the paradox of half guard. Very often, I coach my athletes to force half guard as one of the premier passing positions for the top athlete. I, along with many other coaches in the sport of jiu-jitsu, fully believe that half guard is one of the single best passing opportunities for the top athlete. At the same time, I also coach the bottom athlete to specifically go towards half guard as one of the premier sweeping and control positions in the sport. So there's a sense in which there's a definite paradox, even a contradiction here. How can it be that the same position can be both one of the very best positions for the top athlete for passing purposes, and at the same time one of the very best sweeping and control positions for the bottom athlete? How does that work? Well, ultimately, one of the big themes of this video is going to be to point out that both can be true at the same time, contingent upon the control of the head and shoulders of the bottom athlete. If indeed the top athlete can control the head and shoulders of the bottom athlete, yes, it is one of the strongest passing positions in the sport. But if the bottom athlete can deny head and shoulder control to the top athlete, it rapidly becomes one of the best sweeping and control positions in the sport. And so this whole half guard video is bound up with the idea of head and shoulder control. From the bottom athlete's perspective, we're always looking to deny head and shoulder control to the top athlete. And if we can do this, we can turn this into one of the greatest control and sweeping positions in the sport. As such, the primary focus on this instructional video is to get to what we call the underhook series, where I take my outside arm and place it as an underhook underneath our opponent's arm. If we can get to this position, it's very easy for us to deny head and shoulder control to the top athlete. In my opinion, the single most important movement series out of this underhook is the tight waist underhook series. And this is, in my opinion, the most important part of this instructional video. The idea is that we create a trilemma for our opponent between three kinds of body movement. A roll-through sweep, which has two manifestations, both of which will be shown in tremendous detail throughout this video. The roll-through sweep, in its first manifestation, has three critical steps: a lower leg shift, then a knee lift, and then a hip shift. If we can reliably get to these three body movements and perform them in that sequence, you're going to have a lot of success sweeping people with the roll-through sweep as it's portrayed in this video. The only way our opponent can really resist this simple three-step sequence is to deny the second step of this three-step sequence, the knee lift. If our opponent can keep his knee on the floor, then understand something very simple. The more he resists his knee being lifted off the mat, the easier it becomes for us to lift ourselves off the mat. And as a result, we can come up into a situation where we have a tight waist on our opponent on our knees, and our opponent has a whizzer against us. This whizzer versus tight waist confrontation becomes one of the key elements of the video. From here, we can perform a second variation of the roll-through sweep where we use momentum to roll opponents over. In addition, as our opponent goes to resist the initial roll-through sweep, the other two horns of the dilemma start to kick in. The more our opponent resists the sweep by placing hands on the mat, the more vulnerable he becomes to simple duck under and limp arm and cross-body ride moves that take us towards our opponent's back. As our opponent resists us getting to the back through the use of his whizzer, the more vulnerable he becomes to leg takedowns, ankle picks, single legs, and reverse double legs. And so our opponent gets caught up in a three-way dilemma, which makes it extremely difficult for him to stop a movement either as a roll-through sweep, or some kind of movement towards our opponent's back, or some kind of takedown at the legs. And between those three options, it's going to be extremely difficult for your opponent to stop you. In addition, there is another element, the use of the jacket, in particular the lapel of our opponent's gi, which can create extremely strong single leg attacks from bottom half guard. The combination of all these moves in our underhook series will make you a very, very difficult athlete to stop. From bottom position, you'll be able to get up and sweeping your opponent in a fairly short period of time. Understand, of course, that your opponent will quickly figure out the value of the underhook and start to impose his own underhook upon you. Then we go to the second great subject matter of this video, the idea of the overhook series. Once the top athlete secures the underhook, he can begin to control the head and shoulders, typically with some kind of crossface and underhook control. This can create real problems for the athlete on bottom. Our response to it is two variations of the elbow escape. We'll be going through a single elbow escape series and a double elbow escape series. These will create a sense of distance control, which enable us to fight an opponent off, deny control of our head to our opponent, and bring us back into submission offense from bottom position. We also look at the idea of distance control through the use of knee shields. Knee shields represent one of the few ways in which we can use a pushing motion to hold an opponent off, deny control of our head to our opponent, and as a result, we can go into one of the next great themes of this instructional video, the knee lever. The knee lever is one of the premier methods of off-balancing and reversing people from bottom position. It has value as a sweep, and it also has value as a means of generating kazushi, or off-balancing from bottom position. We spend a lot of time looking at the problem of reverse half-guard postures. Sometimes opponents will sit through down to a hip and change the way their hips are configured relative to ours. This creates new and interesting problems in need of solutions. We show very, very interesting and effective ways of dealing with this common problem. Understand the tremendous value of the half-guard position. It forms an incredibly tight connection to your opponent, which will slow the pace of the match down. It's equally ineffective both with and without a gi, and it is unusually well suited to all body types, including short-limbed body types, which often struggle with other forms of guard, so for example, close guard. Half guard is a position which anyone in all age categories, all weight categories, and all skill levels can use with tremendous effect to slow down the match and create ideal sweeping conditions that'll take you from bottom position to top position.
Let's start off with just a general introduction, the big picture as it were, of our general approach to half-guard bottom position. Let's start off with a reflection that there is something of a paradox with regards half-guard bottom position. Whenever most coaches are going to advise people on how to pass someone's guard, one of the absolute most popular options that they offer is the option of deliberately putting yourself into your opponent's half guard, usually by stuffing one of your opponent's legs and forcing yourself into a half guard situation. And this is seen as one of the most high percentage and one of the most effective ways to pass your opponent's guard. So for example, if I have an opponent who's down on the floor and I have control of one of my training partner's legs and I stuff my training partner's legs down, I can set myself up to go into a situation where I can surround my training partner's leg, stuff the knee between my legs, and settle down into a half guard position. And from here, we can go into a very strong passing situation. Okay? So this strategy of stuffing a leg and deliberately forcing yourself into a half guard is absolutely one of the most high percentage passing methodologies in the modern sport of jiu-jitsu. On the other hand, many of those same coaches will also counsel their athletes when they're in bottom position to willingly go to a half guard situation. I'm one of those coaches. How do we reconcile this? Isn't this something of a paradox? On the one hand, I'm telling my athletes, hey, if you're on top, force the half guard and pass from there. It's one of the best things you can do. And on the other hand, I'm saying to those same athletes, if you're underneath your opponent, force your way to half guard. And it's one of the best things you can do. There's an obvious contradiction there. How do we resolve this? Well, we need to look at it in terms of the two central problems associated with half guard. And once you understand what these two central problems are, you'll see that we can work very successfully from half guard top as passers if we have certain conditions met, and we can work very successfully as half guard sweepers from bottom if certain conditions are met. The obvious question is, what are those conditions? Well, the first one, and arguably the most important, has to do with the notion of head control. Every half guard battle that you're in is essentially the same battle. It's the battle for control of the bottom athlete's head and shoulders. So if we have an opponent down on the mat, and I am able to get underneath my training partner's arm on one side, so I have inside and under position with my right arm, and I'm able to get my shoulder inside his shoulder and apply a strong crossface on the other side. I now have a set of wedges, my shoulder, my left forearm, my right forearm wedged around my training partner's head and shoulders. Okay, that gets locked in place by my head position. And then I go in and wedge my training partner's hips, and now we're in a fine position to initiate passing our training partner's guard. We've set a series of wedges, in this case because my hands are locked, closed wedges around our opponent's head and shoulders. If I can do this, if I can lock down my opponent's head and shoulders, this becomes a very, very dominating passing position. But what if I can't lock down his head and shoulders? What if my opponent, for example, got his arm underneath mine and came up on his elbow? Now, I can't apply any kind of cross-face pressure. There's no way for me to do so. His shoulders aren't even on the mat. There's a constant danger of my back being taken in situations like this. I can't really go to apply pressure and weight on my training partner. His elbow supports my weight very easily. Okay? So in this sense, my opponent has denied me control of his head. And as a result, he's in an extremely strong sweeping position. For example, as he threatens my back, I have to put my arm in here as a whizzer or overhook to prevent him taking my back. And that makes it very easy for him to start scooping inside my legs, and from here, turning me over and causing all kinds of problems. So there's an obvious sense here in which everything comes down to this central question. Who controls the movement of the bottom athlete's head? If the bottom athlete controls that movement and they can move their head and shoulders freely, then they're going to be in a very strong position to sweep and off-balance me. If, on the other hand, the top athlete controls the movement of the head and shoulders, then they're going to be in a very strong position to pass. And that's how we resolve the apparent paradox of half-guard position, and how one position can be both one of the very best passing positions and one of the very best sweeping positions, depending upon who controls the movement of the bottom player's head and shoulders. So when it comes time to pass our opponent's guard, a huge part of what we do is to lock down our opponent's head and shoulders. And when it's time to work from bottom position, a huge part of what we do is to protect our head and shoulders from our opponent and get inside those capturing wedges that our opponent goes to make use of. Understand, as always, that the primary problem here is always the problem of wedges. Remember, one of our big themes in the Go Further Faster series is that wedges, I'll say that again, weight without wedges are useless. Okay, so I can put as much weight as I want coming up. It's worthless for me to put weight on my opponent from here. If anything, it'll make me more vulnerable to a simple roll-through sweep and just facilitate the bottom man's movements. What counts here is not how much weight I put on my opponent, but rather the mechanical efficiency of the wedges. My weight only serves to lock my wedges in place. It's the wedging around the head and shoulders that's going to make me effective in situations like this and enable me to start passing. Okay? So it's not weight per se that I'm interested in applying in top half guard. Rather, the only purpose of my weight is to lock the wedges that I put around my opponent's head and shoulders in place. So there's the first central problem of half guard. How are we, as the bottom athlete, going to deny control of our head and shoulders to our opponent? The second big problem with half guard is distance management. If we're working from bottom position, from open guard, for example, here I have quite a large degree of distance control over my opponent. If he goes to move away from me, my lapel grip makes it quite difficult. If he goes to move into me, my feet on the hips make it quite difficult. And as a result, it's quite easy for us from here to go in and control distance between ourselves and our opponent. Interestingly, my opponent, for example, stands up. With my two legs in front of my opponent, I have an ability to both pull with my upper body, push with my lower body, and by changing feet positions, I can create pulling effects with my legs. My legs can pull him in, and at the same time, my legs can push away. So we can simultaneously both push and pull from the bottom position. Now let's contrast that with half guard. Once my opponent closes a chest-to-chest position from here, my legs can no longer push effectively on my opponent. My legs can only pull. So I've lost half the reason why we're effective from any bottom position, which is our ability to both push and pull on our opponent. Now I'm limited to pushing with my hands. It's just not the same. Okay. I'll say this again because it's so important. The moment our opponent gets to a chest-to-chest position in half guard, you are now limited with your legs to the action of pulling. You've lost the capacity to push. That won't change until some kind of change occurs in leg position. Now I have a knee in front of his hip. Now I can start pushing. Now I can govern distance going away from me like so. Okay. So there's a sense in which bottom half guard, chest to chest like this, can be a very problematic position because I lose the ability to push with my legs. I can only pull now. And so distance management, one of the most important things for any bottom position, is seemingly lost or at least greatly diminished. That's why many people are not particularly enamored of this position, chest to chest, bottom half guard, because it seems like from here there's very little I can do with my legs in terms of pushing. Rather, they can only pull inwards until we get some kind of fundamental change in body position, where once again we can start the action of pushing with our legs. Okay? So there's a sense then in which we lose something very significant. Once someone gets down to that chest-to-chest position in half guard, you lose the ability to push with your legs. And remember, guard play is almost always the interplay between your capacity to push and pull with your legs and arms on your opponent. It's that push-pull dynamic that makes you a difficult person to contend with when you're working from bottom position. These then are the two central problems associated with bottom half guard. How are we going to protect our head and shoulders? And how are we going to work to somehow maintain this push-pull dynamic in a situation where there's a big danger of us losing it and ending up in half guard chest to chest where you can only pull with your legs and no longer push. Now, we just looked at the idea of the paradox of half guard, the idea that half guard can be both one of the very best guard passing positions for the top guy in the entire sport of jiu-jitsu, and it can be one of the very best sweeping positions for the bottom athlete, all dependent upon the athlete's ability to control the bottom athlete's head and shoulders. Who wins that battle wins the position in most cases. We saw that there's a cost to go into half guard where our opponent goes chest to chest. And that cost is you no longer have a strong ability to manage distance between you and your opponent. Now, distance control is one of the most important elements for success in general from bottom position in jiu-jitsu. So if you lose that, it's a big deal. If that's one of the costs associated with half guard, it's time we started looking at what are the benefits. Why would I choose half guard as a bottom position? What's the appeal of it? If there's this potential downside, what's the upsell on this? Let's have a look at that right now. The first thing you'll notice about half guard at bottom is if I can get to certain kinds of positions, you form extremely strong connections to your opponent's body. Okay, so for example, if I take a tight waist grip on my training partner and go all the way around my training partner's waist and lock onto my training partner's hip, then from here I have the choice of going with my inside leg to hook onto my training partner or my outside leg. This enables me to form a very, very strong 2-on-1 connection to my training partner's leg. Two of my legs control one of his. With my head in close to his chest, when he goes to pull away from me, when he goes to stand up, These things are all exceptionally difficult for them because the connection is just so strong. Okay, you're connected directly to your opponent's hips. You're connected 2-on-1 to your training partner's legs, and you have the option now of connecting to the second leg in ways which will make sweeps and turnovers very, very easy. The idea behind half guard, or one of the ideas behind half guard, is somewhat similar to the standing position. When we work without a gi, in standing position, we often make use of so-called 2-on-1 grips, where we have tremendous positional control over our training partner. When we work with the gi on, we do more or less the same thing, going over our training partner's back and controlling with two arms around one of our training partner's arms and gaining strong control of our training partner's upper body. And from here, we can often do very, very good work in the standing position. Okay? Essentially, what we're doing with half guard is exactly that. We're taking our two legs and exerting very, very strong control around one of our training partner's legs. So it's a species of 2-on-1 control, augmented by the strong connection to our training partner's hips and waist. So when my opponent tries to take his leg out, it's so difficult. The connection of my ear to his chest, combined with this very strong form of connection, 2-on-1 to the legs, makes for tremendously strong connection to our opponent's body. So that's one great advantage of it. Another great advantage of going into half guard position is your ability to get underneath your opponent's center of gravity. Now, this will be contingent upon your arm grip. If my opponent has his arm underneath mine, it's very difficult for me to get underneath the center of gravity. However, if I'm able to get underneath his arm, it's very, very simple for me now to get my hips through underneath my opponent and start working my way under his center of gravity. And as a result, we're going to get many opportunities from here to get his body going forwards over our head. And you can see his center of gravity is directly over mine now. And so from here, turnovers, getting up to our base, all of these things are going to be relatively easy now because we've got so deep underneath our training partner's center of gravity. Another great benefit of working from half guard position is essentially when you work from half guard, you're cutting your training partner's body in half and you're completely dominating one side of your opponent's body. Typically, in an open guard situation, it's my whole body against my training partner's whole body. Okay, whether I work with straight or cross lapel grips, his whole body is in front of my whole body. However, when I go to half guard, the situation changes. Now my whole body is in front of half of his body. And so by essentially cutting your training partner's body in half, you've gained a tremendous amount of focus over one part of your opponent's body. And you're devoting now 100% of your strength on 50% of his. And this can be used in tactical ways, which are very, very useful. Okay. Another great advantage to the half guard position that might make us want to favor it is that any time I'm underneath my opponent's arm, like so, and I'm coming up on my elbow, I'm halfway to my opponent's back. Okay. The only thing between me and his back now is his overhook or whizzer arm. In this case, it's his right arm, which is coming around like so. If that whizzer arm should ever relinquish and move away, you are now just seconds away from going behind your opponent and getting into a good attacking position behind your opponent's back. Okay? So again, this is another one of the great appeals of the half guard situation. If my arms are in certain kinds of positions, you're only a heartbeat away from your opponent's back at any given moment in the match. And we'll be looking at many different ways to get to our opponent's back from half guard. So these are some of the reasons why we favor half guard as a position. Yes, certain kinds of half guard do come at a cost. If my opponent's chest to chest, then here I've lost any pretense of an ability to push with my legs. And so distance control from here, chest to chest, is a difficult thing to deal with. Okay. However, if I can get into certain kinds of positions like so, now distance control is relatively easy. I can manage my training partner's body weight. I can prevent him from framing and wedging around my head and shoulders. And as a result, all kinds of body movements. So for example, heisting, which gets us up to our knees and into a position where we can start putting weight and pressure into our training partner, all become possible. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why you might favor half guard position as one we could go to in a proactive fashion to enhance our sweeping game from bottom position. Now, we're looking at the idea of an overview of the approach to half guard that we want you going through at fundamental level in the sport. There are 3 prerequisites that I often push on my students for getting your progress in half guard accelerated. These are the notion of connection to your opponent's leg. Your opponent has one leg between yours. How are we going to connect to it properly? The idea of kazushi, getting our opponent out of balance, because if we can get someone out of balance from half guard, it's a lot easier for us to attack them. And the third is movement. How are we going to move our body efficiently so that we can perform the various moves that we try from half guard very, very easily? So connection, kazushi, and movement are the 3 main prerequisites that we preach. Let's have a look first at the idea of connection to my opponent's leg. You've got a bunch of good options here. Let's quickly run through them. Okay, we've got the opponent here in front of us. We know that one of his legs is to be controlled by ours. Let's understand that we have a bunch of options here, okay? I've got 2 legs to control his leg. I can go with an inside hook. That's the leg that goes inside my opponent's legs, can come over and hook my training partner's leg, just like so. Okay, so that would be an inside hook. And this is something we often make use of. An outside hook would be one where my outside leg comes over my training partner's leg and hooks from the outside. Let's make sure that when we use this method, my knee points down towards the back of his knee. It's no good my knee pointing up at the ceiling. Now my opponent can easily thread his leg out of here and start passing, get into good position. So we want to make sure if we use that outside hook, we go in and our knee points at the back of his knee, just like so. So we have our 2 main forms of connection at the legs, inside hook and outside hook. You often have the option in these situations of locking a triangle. Nothing wrong with this under certain circumstances. Be aware, however, that when you do lock a triangle, you limit your movement from underneath your opponent. So this is not something you want to hang on to for long periods of time. Okay. However, for short periods of time, this can be a very useful thing. Let's understand something about the outside hook. There are 2 main forms of outside hook that we make use of. There is an outside hook above the knee, as we're working with now, and there's going to be a lower leg shift. This will become very important when we look at some of the main moves from bottom half guard. This is where I shift my legs into a situation where I lock around his ankle rather than his knee. Okay, and from here, just the ankle is being controlled, as opposed to a situation where here I'm hooking from the outside above the knee. Here I'm hooking from the outside below the knee, and this will be an important thing, as we'll soon see in this video. Now, in addition to the notion of an inside hook and an outside hook, we also have a combination of both, which is a scorpion. In a scorpion, I take my outside leg over his and I lock a triangle with my legs. The end of the triangle, my shoelaces, are put inside his shoelaces. And as a result, when my opponent goes to drive forward, there's a lot of resistance. You can manage distance here. And a scorpion is interesting because it represents one of the few ways in which we can push on an opponent from bottom position. So it has a special importance in the half guard repertoire. If I just have my legs around my opponent, I don't really have any true capacity to push with my legs. My opponent drives into me here, and I have no ability to push back with my legs. That changes when we go to apply a scorpion. The scorpion is interesting because it gives us this ability to push back with our legs into our opponent's legs. So as he drives forward, I can push back on my opponent's legs and prevent him getting strong cross faces, etc., etc. Not only does it give me an ability to push on my opponent's leg, it also gives me a strong ability to off-balance people with a scorpion elevator. Okay, we'll be looking at that fairly shortly. Now, another form of connection we can make to our opponent is with a half butterfly hook. From situations where my opponent takes his knee off the floor and turns through on his hips, this is a good time for us to start coming down to our training partner's leg and hooking my foot inside my training partner's knee. And as a result, from situations like this, we can now start to elevate people. We can take them backwards, we can turn and bring them across the body, etc., etc. Okay, now we're learning to use that butterfly hook connection. So once again, the main forms of connection that we have to our training partner from half guard. I have 2 legs Every half guard is essentially a tail of two of my legs against one of my opponent's legs. I have the option of inside hook. This can be augmented by a triangle. Outside hook, which it can be done above the knee or below the knee. A scorpion, which is a combination of outside leg over the top, triangle, shoelace to shoelace, and when he drives forward, this is unusual insofar as it gives us an ability to push with our legs from bottom position. Okay. Then the idea, if my opponent goes to sit through, of a half butterfly hook, and my foot goes through underneath my training partner, and now gives us an ability to start lifting, off balancing, etc., etc. Okay. So these are the main ways in which we form connection to our training partner from bottom position. Understand that the heart and soul of the connection is the connection of your two legs to your opponent's one leg. Every half guard is this kind of a species of 2-on-1 control. At least it's in it initially when you first tie up with your opponent. So we want to learn how to fight with our feet and get control of his legs in the most efficient ways possible. The next element is kazushi. We've got to be able to get people out of balance. If we can get the top man moving and out of balance, it's going to be a lot easier to sweep him and get to his back. So let's look at the main options for off balancing from bottom. Whenever we work in situations like this, one very, very useful form of off balancing from bottom position, especially when my opponent elects to turn his hips in, is to use a windmill kind of action, where I take one arm and I chop down towards my training partner's legs, and at the same time my upper body cross faces my training partner, and we go into a bridging action. So we use an inside hook up to my training partner's calf muscle, we lock on board, and then in one motion my two arms windmill, one blocks his knee and the other cross faces his head, and as a result we form a strong off balancing action. Now as your opponent increases in expertise, you're going to find you may not always knock them all the way over, but at the very least they will have to base out with either a hand or a leg to prevent being taken over. So for example, if I blocked his leg and I bridged strongly, he may well have to reach for the floor with his left hand to prevent going over, and that would give me inside position on my training partner, and as a result we could start working very effectively now from bottom half guard and getting into our attacks. Another very strong form of off balancing which we often make use of is one called a knee lever, where I take an inside hook, my foot goes to my training partner's knee, and I cross my two toes, just like so, the two big toes. I don't cross my ankles, just the two big toes. Now I take my hips off the floor and I just point my body over in this direction to get my opponent out of balance. If it doesn't react, I'll come up on top. Most of your opponents will react. They'll put hands on the floor, etc., etc. So as we first go to off balance someone here, now with their body out of balance, we can start going into our various defensive movements from bottom position. I'll just show that one from a different angle. Inside hook goes over my training partner's knee. My two big toes cross. I take my hips just slightly off the floor, and then from here my two knees point out in this direction, forcing a defensive reaction, which gives us many of the grips, etc., that we like to work with from bottom position. Another excellent means of taking someone out of balance from bottom position and creating kazushi is through the use of a butterfly hook. As my opponent's knee comes off the floor, we're going to get opportunities to go underneath our training partner's knee, just like so. And from here I can off balance to my right, lifting, getting the man out of balance, or I can shift my hips and get him off balance in the opposite direction. So this is another excellent way to get people out of balance from bottom position and create kazushi. One of the strongest is the so-called scorpion elevator, where I have a scorpion on my training partner and my two arms are underneath his two arms like so. And from here, as we apply a scorpion on our training partner, we're going to take our hands underneath and we're going to bump forward with our knees so that his weight goes over our head, just like so. Now I push and stiff arm out to the side, and we end up right here next to our training partner. This will force him to put on a whizzer. If he doesn't, I'll take his back, and now we're propped up off the floor and in a good position to start many very useful forms of attack. So once again, I managed to get my two arms Underneath my training partner's two arms, I go in and apply a scorpion on my training partner's legs. From here, my hands go into a pushing position. I can grip the gi, I can just put my hands on my training partner's rib cage, and then the whole thing is my knees going forward. That gets weight onto his hands. And then from here, watch my hands and feet come out in this direction. So we change levels upwards, and now we find ourselves in a very good attacking position. You can switch now from scorpion to inside or outside hooks, etc., etc. Now, in addition to the idea of connection and kizushi, it's also body movement. I have to be able to move my body efficiently around my opponent to make these half guard moves work. The most important general forms of body movement that we work with in half guard are shrimping movements, where we just practice sliding shrimps, where I slide my hips along the floor, bridging shrimps or power shrimps, where we bridge up like so and then slide along the floor, reverse shrimping, where we reach along the mat and use a pulling action instead of a pushing action and physically pull our body towards our feet, the exact opposite of conventional shrimping. In conventional shrimping, we plant a foot and we push our hips away from the foot. In reverse shrimping, we plant our foot and we pull our hips towards our foot. In addition, the idea of a pendulum that takes us from a lying down or supine position. We use a pendulum leg to impart momentum so we can sit up very effectively. This takes us from situations where we're working from our back to one where we come up into a prop position underneath our training partner. The fourth one, from a situation where we're seated, we use a planted foot to heist and go onto our knees, okay? And we use these body movements all the time from half guard bottom, either shrimping out to the side, reverse shrimping to change angle and location, to change from one shoulder to the other. The idea of a pendulum to come up into a prop position underneath our training partner, and the idea of a hip heist, so we can go from a seated situation to one where we're on two knees, and then from here we can start taking people down from bottom position. So these elements of connection, kizushi, or off balancing as it's often referred to, and this idea of fighting for control of our training partner's feet, 2-on-1 connection here, like so. These are the key elements involved in control for bottom half guard. These are the prerequisites that we work with. Without these mastered as skills, it would be difficult to hit the various movements and moves that we'll be looking at throughout this video. Okay, so let's start going down into the actual nitty-gritty, the basic overview of what we're going to be doing from half guard. Let's start off with what we said earlier when we talked about the notion of distance control. Whenever you work in bottom position, it's a wonderful thing if you can control distance between you and your opponent, because the biggest problem you're going to face is people getting on top of you and you can't move. So if you can control distance, push them back, it's a wonderful thing. We saw that if someone gets chest to chest on us, our ability to do that is greatly diminished. So there's an obvious lesson from that. We should probably start our investigation of half guard from situations where we have something to push back with, and that means knee shields. So probably the single best place for us to start a systematic overview of half guard bottom is with the notion of a knee shield. If my opponent gets chest to chest, we saw earlier, we now pretty much lack an ability to push back effectively on our opponent's body. Probably the best we can do here in terms of pushing is the use of a scorpion. And that's not going to be much use to me if my opponent has an underhook here. He can still easily extract his leg from a scorpion under these circumstances. So most of the time, it's very much in our interest to start putting some kind of shield between my chest and my opponent's chest. And the way that's typically done when we work with a jacket is to take our knee and place it right here on our training partner's sternum, pointed towards our training partner's jaw. Let's not put our knee pointing towards the opposite hip. It's very easy for him to put weight down over our hip now and crush the knee shield. It's not going to be very effective here. Okay. Instead, we want our knee up by the sternum, just like so. Now, from here, I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to take a cross grip on my training partner, nice and high. This means that if my opponent goes to pull away from me, we manage distance in that direction through the lapel. Because my wrist, elbow, and knee are all in a straight line, when he goes to push into me, we have a great ability to prevent him going forward chest to chest. All that remains is to monitor our training partner's inside elbow. So when he tries to make grips on me, it's a difficult thing. I thumb post inside my training partner, and as a result, we can monitor the movements of his arm and make it very difficult for him to go in and control our head, etc., etc. Now, once we get to a position like this, it's very, very hard for him to put any kind of serious forward pressure. We control distance in two directions. If he goes to move away, my left hand controls distance. If he goes to move forward, my left knee controls distance. And as a result, we're in a position where we can start changing our levels on our training partner. Okay, and from here we can make adjustments into one of our favorite attacking grips, the tight waist, where my ear goes to my training partner's chest, my hand goes to the far hip, and we're propped up on our elbow like so. And now we're in the perfect position to go on the attack. Once again, the idea of a knee shield. When we work with a jacket, the knee points right at our training partner's chin. The knee is high at roughly 45-degree angle. And from here, we use a 2-on-1 lapel feed to get a good grip underneath our training partner's ear. The more my hand comes down towards the pectorals, the less control it has of his head. So we want to make sure our hand goes up and passes the line of his ear. And as a result, we control distance in two directions, forward and backwards. Initially, we like to monitor the inside of our training partner's elbow. But at some point, we're going to get options now to come up to an elbow. I use my knee shield as a pendulum, and we switch around into a tight waist grip. Now, you've got that excellent 2-on-1 connection to your opponent. Your head's in a strong position. You're locked to your opponent's waist. And when he tries to put weight on us, it's very difficult because we're propped up on our elbow. If he tries to cross-face us, it's impossible because our head and shoulders are not even on the mat to be cross-faced. And it's very difficult for him to try and get underhooks on me in this position because we're so far around our opponent's body with a tight waist. And as a result, we're in a superb attacking position. Okay, so one more time, the proper use of a knee shield. We come in here on our training partner, controlling with that cross lapel grip, knee in place, and now excellent ability to pull and push. As a general rule, when we work from knee shields, it's usually a good thing to draw his head towards us. This is done by a combination of left hand and left knee pulling our training partner forward. The more his weight is back on his heels, the harder it is for me to get this man out of balance. So as a general rule, we're looking to bring everything forward. Now we come in and monitor our training partner's bicep, and this creates good positions for us to bring the elbow out, come up, and now we're locked into our training partner's waist and ready to play. In this way, the knee shield can get us around the single biggest problem, the central problem associated with half guard position, how we're going to monitor distance, and how we're going to manage our opponent's body weight, and how we're going to control the distance between my opponent's chest and my chest. Now, if our primary interest is in maintaining or controlling distance between myself and my opponent, and being able to stop him from moving away and stop him coming forward chest to chest, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to use it profitably? Well, in my opinion, the single most useful means of attack from half guard bottom, and if you walk away from this video series with nothing else, walk away with this, is to attack out of a tight waist grip propped on your elbow. Okay, this position gives you numerous forms of attack, which go first towards your opponent's back, second, rolling your opponent over. We'll look at that very soon. And thirdly, coming up and grabbing your opponent's opposite leg, either with ankle picks or double legs, and putting them down to the mat. Okay, so it gives you three complementary directions of attack that work like a charm. I'll just we'll spend a lot of time later in the video looking at these, but I'll just quickly run you through the main idea. From a situation where we have a knee shield on our training partner, and we're doing a good job of monitoring and dealing with the distance problem here, we can come up onto an elbow. We can release the cross grip and use our leg like a pendulum, come around and get to a tight waist grip. From the tight waist, our whole thing is to use a pass off, where we go from an inside hook to an outside hook, and then a critical element here. We go down to our training partner's leg and we perform what we'll be looking at later in the video, a lower leg shift, where I go from above my training partner's knee to a situation where I'm locked around the ankle. This forces my opponent to put on a whizzer. If he doesn't, I'll go straight to his back. Now, three directions of attack. I can roll my opponent through and take him over. If my opponent puts his hand on the floor to prevent this, there's no reason now why I can't hit a simple reverse shrimp, bring my head up to the side, pull on my tight waist, and put my ear on his back. So when he tries to reach back with his whizzer, it's impossible. And then from here, it's a simple thing for us to come up and move straight in towards our training partner's back and go on the attack. Alternatively, in situations where I'm propped up like so, this is also an excellent time for us to start going on the attack with ankle picks of various kinds. We'll be looking at a bunch of them. From here we can go through and connect to our training partner's heel, just like so, and then we start taking people out of balance as he goes to balance out, putting his hands on the floor. It's not difficult for us now to come up to our base as he tries to come back and hold his balance and get back to a wizard situation. From here we can easily put the man down to the floor and knock him down. So we've got three great directions of attack. We can go towards his back, we can roll the man through, or we can come up to the second leg and put him down. Between those three, you can form tremendously effective attacking patterns on your opponent. That's going to be the primary series that we look at from bottom position. We're spending a lot of time on that, a lot of detail. Another one we spend a lot of time with is a knee lever series. The knee lever, as we saw earlier, is a method of off-balancing people. And we know that if we can get our foot outside of our training partner's knee, go foot over foot, bring our hips off the mat, start turning people, we can get them out of balance. It's also possible to use this as a direct form of sweep. So for example, if I have control of my training partner's sleeves in here, make a strong base, from here, it's an easy thing for us to get that same knee lever position and turn our training partner over and start scoring top position. So combined with the correct grip, knee levers are another series that we work from half guard bottom whenever we're trying to off-balance people, and we have the benefit of going underneath our training partner's arm. Now, another form of attack, very, very useful from here. Also, coming out of situations where we have that initial knee shield in place, and we come up and get around our training partner's waist like so. We can transfer from a tight waist to a single leg type situation. Okay, how are we going to do this? Well, many ways for us to do so. But from here, very often what we'll do is we'll get a hold of our training partner's lapel and start feeding our hand through below our training partner's buttocks. So we go from tight waist to single leg situation. And then from here, we lock our training partner's lapel into a very, very tight grip like so. Now this grip on the lapel is much easier for me to maintain than a no-gi grip on my training partner's leg. So that when I heist up to my knees and I find myself in a situation where Matthias goes to whizzer and sprawl, I can easily hold on to his legs. If I just held the leg itself and he sprawls, the hand tends to come off. But when I grip to my training partner's lapel, there won't be any slippage in my grip. And as he goes back, back, back and away, my grip is maintained. And now all we need to do is start bringing our head up. And there's numerous ways in which we can knock our training partner down from this position. We'll be looking at a bunch of them. The key idea is that starting from a general half guard type situation where we prop up and go through to our training partner's waist, we can make a transfer where we take our arm here below the buttocks and feed the lapel in. And then from this situation, not so difficult for us to come up to our base. Okay, from a situation like this, you can go for your opponent's second leg, or you can just work hard to off balance him in this direction here. Okay, and then from the situation, go over the top and double leg your opponent down to the mat. So this lapel series also is an extremely effective way of working from bottom position whenever we get underneath our training partner's arm. Another excellent way for us to work from here is to go deep underneath our training partner's legs. A fundamental series is not the time to be going into the intricacies of deep half guard, but there are some simplifications of deep half guard which I believe are appropriate even at a fundamentals level. So, from a situation where we start off with our knee shield in place and we come up, we go around our training partner, we're going to come in and get a hold of our training partner's leg just like so. So we have tight waist, scoop grip on our training partner. From this situation, I'm going to shorten my tight waist and put my hand on my training partner's lat muscle just like so. We're going to move our training partner's head over our body to my right hand side so that his hands go forward. This lightens our training partner's leg and creates situations where we can start moving out and around in this direction. From here, it won't be difficult for us to start separating our training partner's legs and coming up to our base. And as a result, we're in perfect position to start running our training partner down, either with double legs or, if he stands up with us, with single legs. We'll be spending quite a bit of time on this, don't worry. We'll be seeing all kinds of details from here. So as we move around the corner, come out to the side, once we start making this hook movement, that brings us up. If my opponent denies me the second leg, when we stand up with our training partner's leg, it won't be a difficult thing for us to help. So, straight in and put the man down to the mat out of a single leg situation. So these are all very effective ways for us to attack. We'll be looking at all of them in considerable detail throughout this half guard video series. But it all starts out of a situation where we are able to hold our opponent's chest off our chest, courtesy of the knee shield, and then from there work underneath our training partner's arm. If we get the dominant undergrip, there's so many ways using the methods we just outlined here where we can form highly successful sweeping and positional attacks upon our opponent. Now, we're trying to give you a big overview for our approach to teaching fundamentals half guard. The big picture that we're trying to throw at you is that there's a fundamental paradox involved with half guard. That on the one hand, it's one of the best passing positions in the sport, and on the other hand, it's one of the best sweeping positions in the sport. And it all comes down to how are you going to control the bottom man's head and shoulders, and how are you going to control distance. Half guard can be problematic when you lose in those two areas, and it can be incredibly beneficial if you win in those two areas. So there's two very distinct sides to our half guard game. There's the side where we can control distance, usually courtesy of a knee shield. So this is the working forward from the best possible case scenario where we are in control of distance courtesy of a knee shield. Then we typically go to a tight waist and we have a bunch of series that we work out of there, all of which are very, very useful for sweeping and scoring points. But there's a second side to what we do. Now I've got to look at the worst case scenario where my opponent is chest to chest with his arms wedged around my head and shoulders. So now he's got complete control of my head and shoulders, and I have no ability to control distance. So now we've got to start with the worst case scenario and walk backwards out of there. Previously, we looked at starting with the best case scenario, knee shield, where we're in control of distance, and we worked forwards to our favorite attacks out of a tight waist. Now we're looking to our least favorite position, where our opponent is chest to chest, wedged around our head and shoulders. He's in control of distance. He's got the wedges set around our head and shoulders and controlling the game. How are we going to work backwards out of there and get into a better scenario? So, if my opponent's on top of me and he's gotten chest to chest and he has inside position with a cross face, his shoulder inside my shoulder, his head inside my head, his right arm inside and underneath my arm, and as a result, he's formed an effective set of wedges around my head and shoulders, which means I cannot get my shoulders off the mat. And as a result, it's pretty easy for my opponent to start working his foot to an inside position from here and threatening to pass into mount or side or what have you. Okay, this is obviously much less desirable than the knee shield situation that we looked at previously. If someone walked into the room right now and saw us here and we asked them, who's got the better position? Everyone would point to Mateus, and they'd be right. Okay, this is a good passing position for him. So what are we going to do? As bad as this looks, let's understand something. You are never more than one elbow escape away from turning this from a completely losing situation to a winning situation. Okay, I currently have no ability to push with my legs. I can create some pushing ability here by putting on a scorpion. But because I don't have an underclasp with my left arm, it's not going to do me much good. It's pretty easy for Mateus to put a foot inside or to wedge underneath my heels and lift my scorpion out, etc., etc. So we've got to do something more extreme than that. And that something is almost always an elbow escape. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our hands down towards our training partner's belt on both sides. Okay. As my opponent comes in close with his knees and does all those things that people like to do, we're going to start with a power shrimp that gets our opponent's knee moving out in this direction. So we move in. And as a result, we go right in with our knee inside and in front of his hip. Something magical happens when your knee goes in front of that hip. As Mateus tries to put weight on me, tries to apply his crossface, now for the first time I have an ability to push with my legs. Okay, and that changes everything. That's a huge thing. Now I go further out, and that crossface, which just a few minutes ago, or a few seconds ago rather, was such a powerful weapon against me, has now become a liability to him. So I trap it. And as a result, for every inch that I move out in this direction, now we can start getting strong off-balancing forces that Mateus must start basing out with his other leg. It's not easy for him. And from here we can start taking away our training partner's base support and sweeping people. So understand that if we can hit a simple single elbow escape on our training partner, you can turn that crossface into a liability in so many different ways. Once again, my opponent starts off in what's a very good position for him. I have no ability to here to push with my legs, but if I can start an elbow escape motion, bridging, elbow inside, knee in front of the hip, just one single elbow escape, now we can start pushing. But if I can push, I can trap an arm. Okay, and from here, so many ways for us to go. We'll be looking at a bunch of great attacking options from this position, which enable us to turn things over and get top position in multiple different directions. Now, in addition to the single elbow escape, we also have another series here, the double elbow escape series. This is one of my favorites. For a situation where Mateus has the desirable chest-to-chest position underneath inside control on both sides, wedging around my head and shoulders. Another fine way to work here is a double elbow escape, where once again we start pushing, we go single elbow escape, we push, and my second elbow escape goes here at the arm. So two elbow escapes on one side of the body. We shrimp out, we bring the knee in front, and as a result the head and one arm get completely trapped. And from situations like this, it's relatively easy for us to go into various kinds of submission holds. Okay, it's also relatively easy for us now to start lifting, pommeling, and go into various alternative forms of guard from where we can go on the attack. So a double elbow escape is two elbow escapes performed on one side of the body. We'll be looking at this in a lot of detail. So starting off in what seems to be a losing situation, we come down, and from here, there's the first elbow escape. We push. Now we elbow escape inside the shoulder instead of the hip, and as a result, now we can control distance. When he tries to come towards me, my right knee makes it impossible. When he tries to move away from me, my left knee makes it impossible. And as a result, from here, it's so easy for us now to go in and start attacking with various other forms of guard or what have you. Okay? So these are some simple ways in which we can use our legs, courtesy of the elbow escape, to start to generate a pushing force which can overcome the strongest crossfaces, the strongest wedges around our head and shoulders, and turn what seems to be a losing position around. So we're in a position now to give a quick summary as to where the entire direction of this video will be taking you. We know that there's a primary central problem associated with half guard. This is always going to be the problem of distance, the distance between his chest and my chest. That's one of the critical central problems. As a general rule, the more we can monitor this distance through the use of both pushing and pulling, the more success we're going to have. Okay? As a general rule, if I don't have some kind of barrier between his chest and mine, when my opponent gets direct chest-to-chest contact, I no longer have an ability to push on my opponent with my lower body. And as a result, this can be a very, very damaging position for the guy on bottom. This is one of the strongest passing positions in the sport. And so in situations like this, somewhat undesirable, our whole thing is to reconfigure our body so we can start pushing again. And the only way we can do that is courtesy of the elbow escape. So we have single elbow escape, where my knee finishes on the hip, and we can now push. And we have double elbow escapes, where my knee finishes on the shoulder. And once again, we can push with that lower leg. Okay? Now you're in control of distance again. Okay? So we have the worst case scenarios, where our opponent gets chest to chest, and our general response is either single or double elbow escapes. Okay, you've got to get back your ability to push, so you're once again in control of the distance game. Here, my opponent completely controls distance. You have almost no capacity to push with your lower body, and now you're a loser in the distance game. But the moment we hit that initial elbow escape, and from here we get a knee in front of the hip, now you can push. Okay? If I do it again on the same side, I can put a knee in front of the shoulder, and once again I can push. Now you're in control of distance. Okay? So our general response to the chest-to-chest position is always going to be some variation of elbow escaping. There are some exceptions to that rule. That's by far and away the most important one. Regardless of how our opponent configures his body, whether he stays on two knees, whether he sits through to a hip, doesn't matter. Elbow escape is always going to be king. Now, the second half of our general approach that we want to push upon you for half guard fundamentals is the idea that, okay, if that's the worst case scenario, or the best case scenario, is one where I start off controlling distance, usually with some kind of knee shield, where my knee provides an ability to push with my non-half guard leg. So here's my right leg is the half guard leg, my left leg is the shield leg. And when my opponent tries to come forward, he's caught by that knee. When he tries to pull away, the cross lapel holds him in place. Okay? And from here, we can take advantage of the fact that there is no chest-to-chest contact to start changing levels. And if I can change levels, then I can change my head position and take inside position with my head. And then from here, we can get the vaunted tight waist grip. This tight waist grip is an incredibly controlling method of getting into my opponent's hips, and it gives us 3 incredible avenues of attack. Okay? If my opponent is naive and takes away his whizzer, there's no reason why I can't immediately start going behind people. If my opponent is not naive and holds on with that whizzer to protect his back, he becomes rather vulnerable now to roll through sweeps. If my opponent has a good skill level and recognizes the danger of getting rolled through and starts putting his hands on the floor, there's no reason now why we can't start coming up behind our training partner's back. And in situations like this, applying a whizzer, there's also the other great option here, the option of going into and scoring our training partner's leg, okay, where we can get up on our training partner and use momentum to come up with your base and then attack the second leg, often with ankle picks, sometimes with knee picks. And in this way, this triple form of attack between back, the far leg, and the roll through, you're going to be a very, very difficult player to stop. So everything goes in 2 directions. Best case scenario, you're in control of distance. And as a result, come up to our favorite attacking grip, the tight waist with your head in the inside position. We'll look at a vast number of moves from that position. Okay, absolutely one of the ones we favor. Then, the worst case scenario, where your opponent is completely in control of distance and is chest to chest. From there, it's always about single and double elbow escapes. So once again, we can start a push-pull dynamic on our opponent and get back into counter offense. And so the half guard game splits at fundamental level between these 2 situations. Are we in control of distance with a knee shield? Well, we go the tight waist route. Are we not in control of distance? Well, then we must go into a program of recovery. And the basic idea of recovery here is always going to be some variation of an elbow escape. Once we've hit some form of elbow escape, we can start pushing on our opponent. We're back in control of distance. And once we control distance from bottom half guard, that's when you can start attacking people.